As the Electoral College certifies the presidential race today, data from the election makes clear Hispanic Americans had an outsized impact on the results. Among the biggest takeaways is Latinos are not the voting monolith some analysts apparently thought they were. Exit polls show President-elect Biden won Latinos by a 66 to 32% margin. That success was most notable in Arizona, a state with a nearly 30% Hispanic population. His margins with Latinos helped make him just the second Democrat to win the state in the last 70 years. However, President Trump overperformed expectations with groups' exit polls put under the Latino umbrella. Of note, the president significantly cut into the margins from the typically Democratic stronghold in South Florida, which has a heavily Cuban and Venezuelan population. Though it did not help Mr. Trump win the election, he did win Florida by a wider margin than 4 years ago. Some have also credited Mr. Trump for making inroads with Hispanic voters in South Texas, keeping the state in his column. But as Jack Herrera writes, the president did not win the Latino vote in Texas. He won the Tejano vote. Understanding that difference, he reports, will be a key for Democrats to move past their one-size-fits-all approach to Hispanic voters. And Jack joins me now from San Francisco. He's an independent journalist and Ida B. Wells Fellow for Type Investigations. Jack, welcome. Great to have you with us. So first off, for our viewers who may not be familiar, tell us what defines the Tejano identity and why does it not fit cleanly into what some might call Latino or Hispanic?
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. I think that one of the people I talked to in South Texas, the Republican chair of Starr County, Ross Ferreira, he put it to me simply where he says that down here, we don't use that word Latino. I don't like that word. We don't use Mexican American. We say we're Tejano, or we just say we're American. And I think it's important to say that, like any Latino community across the country, there's a diverse set of people in South Texas. It's not just, people who see themselves one way or the other. A lot of people from a lot of different countries. But one identity that is very important to understanding in this election is the Tejano identity, which are people that hold that they aren't immigrants, that they're either deep in generations or that they have ancestors who lived on this land in South Texas when it was Tejas, when it was part of Mexico. And that's where the word Tejano comes from.
So they have very, very deep roots in the area. They see themselves as anything but immigrants. Is that right? So do they have less sort of sympathy or interest in, immigrant-related issues?
Certainly. I think that there is less of an investment in that immigrant identity than there is in perhaps other Latino or Latin American diasporic communities elsewhere in the country. And I do think that immigration is not a number one issue for many people in the area. And likewise, nationwide, immigration is actually not always the top issue for Latino communities anywhere in the country, but in particular in South Texas. It's not where Democrats or Republicans really need to focus their message if they're trying to win votes.
And so what issues are important to the Tejano community?
Yeah, certainly. I think that it's a lot of the same issues that you'll see nationwide. The economy is enormously important. It's actually, even among Democrats, I talked to Democrats who talked about how they are very in support of the Second Amendment, very in support of gun rights. They're actually very in support of, very not supportive of abortion rights. Those are two very hot issues in this culturally conservative, often very Catholic or evangelical community. It's also an oil country down there. And so I think there's a lot of investment in the continued production of oil wells. And that led to some nervousness about Democrats' perceived opposition to fracking, although Joe Biden has repeatedly announced his support of such measures.
So even though it does seem to be a community that skews sort of more conservative, especially with social issues and guns, as you mentioned, it has in the past leaned Democratic. So what was it about this particular election or this particular candidate that sort of captured the Tejano vote?
Yeah, that's certainly the question. I was in one county, Zapata County, which voted Republican for the first time since 1920 when it voted for William McKinley. And so this is a county that has voted Democrat for over 100 years. And so the question is, what now has led to that shift? I think more than any one factor is the fact that the Republican Party in Texas saw the opportunity to win voters in this area. Instead of just seeing broadly, as the census or as demographic data would show you, Latino voters who one might assume vote Democrat, it seems like the Republican Party saw a culturally conservative group of people who don't have a very strong immigrant identity, very often identify as white, Hispanic, but as ethnically Hispanic, but racially white. And I think the Republican Party in Texas saw the opportunity to win these votes of people who care about gun rights, who are anti-abortion, who are very invested in the economy. And they saw that they would be amenable to the message of the party and to President Trump. And that increased campaigning, I think, did make the difference.
And is that what state and local officials told you, that they believe that President Trump and Republican campaigners did right? And what about President-elect Biden and Democrats? Did they do something wrong when it comes to appealing to Tejanos?
Yeah, it's a complicated question because, of course, there's so many different factors that go into what changes election. But I think certainly the Democrats in multiple counties felt that their party or their operation lagged behind the Republicans in this election, that there was a renewed sort of energy and organizing among Republicans. And Democrats, largely because of the pandemic, had to cancel and chose to cancel many large-scale events. They canceled door knocking in a lot of areas. And one of the key factors, besides those sort of logistical hurdles that they were dealing with during the pandemic, was that I talked to some Democrats across South Texas, actually a good amount of Democrats, who said that the state and national party never drafted a message specifically for South Texas, that the sort of message that's going to work among Mexican Americans in Dallas or Latinos in Arizona or in California isn't going to play the same way in South Texas. And that's what they think that Democrats need to do better in the next election, is recognize that Latinos are not a monolith and find the specific message that's going to resonate among Tejano, Latino people in South Texas.
Yeah, Democrats have got to get a lot more specific and do their homework. All right, well, Jack Herrera, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya.